Hello, my name is Andrew Nahas, and today I will be presenting my analysis of Pfizer and how COVID-19 has affected their business. On January 9th, 2020, the World Health Organization announced that there were 59 reported cases of a mysterious pneumonia in Wuhan, China. Governments did not take this outbreak seriously enough and put minimal measures in place to restrict the spread of the virus. And by January 25th, the first Canadian case was reported by Health Canada. Tracing initiatives were then put in place to identify who else has been infected in order to stop the spread. However, this did little to curb the rising cases, as on March 18th we reached 100 single-day cases. This prompted Canada to close its borders to non-Canadians apart from Americans and a few other exceptions. However, while cases continued to rise, Canada and the United States announced on March 18th that they will be closing their shared border to non-essential traffic. On March 25th, it was announced that Canadians whose jobs were affected by the pandemic would be receiving stimulus packages to help support people in these difficult times. As the cases started to decline, the majority of students and teachers returned to schools. However, this was short-lived, as on September 23rd, Justin Trudeau announced that the second wave was underway. Currently, we are in the midst of a third wave, and we are rolling out vaccines. However, cases continue to rise in hotspots, and Ontario's hospitals are becoming overwhelmed. Pfizer Inc. was founded in 1849 in New York and is one of the world's largest research-based pharmaceutical and biomedical companies. Pfizer has a lot of experience working with the US government and did very well during the American Civil War, as there was a huge demand for disinfectants, preservatives, and painkillers, which doubled the company's revenue and allowed for its expansion. Pfizer moved into international markets in 1951, and this was just the beginning of their growth as a company. Over the time, over time, company the company has acquired 31 companies, absorbing Warner Lambert in 2000, Pharmacia and Upjohn in 2002, Wyeth in 2009, and Medivation in 2016. Through these mega acquisitions, they were able to carve a market share of 5% in the pharmaceutical industry as of 2019, only behind Roche and Johnson and Johnson. They are a well-established company within the industry with revenues of about 41 billion in 2019, which increased to 41.9 billion in 2020 and looks to continue to rise in the future. As with all medicines, every vaccine must go through extensive and rigorous testing to ensure it's safe before it can be introduced in a country's vaccine program. The preclinical phase is done without testing on humans to evaluate its safety and potential to prevent disease. If the vaccine triggers an immune response in the test subject, it is then tested in human clinical trials in 3 phases. In the first phase, it is given to a small number of volunteers to assess its safety, confirm it generates an immune response, and determine the right dosage. Within the second phase, the vaccine is given to several hundred volunteers to further assess its safety and ability to generate an immune response. In phase 3, the vaccine is given to thousands of volunteers and compared to a similar group of people who did not get the vaccine but received a comparator product. When the results of all the clinical trials are available, a series of steps is required, including reviews of efficacy and safety for regulation and public health policy approvals. There are two major technologies used to create these vaccines: messenger RNA vaccine technology used by Pfizer and Moderna, as well as viral vector technology used by Johnson and Johnson. The latter uses technology that will use a modified version of the virus to deliver important instructions to our cells to produce a harmless piece of the virus that causes COVID-19. This then triggers our immune system to begin producing antibodies and activating other immune cells to fight off what it thinks is an infection. mRNA vaccines are given in the upper arm muscle, and once instructions are inside of the immune cells, the cells use them to make the protein piece. Next, the cell displays the protein piece on the surface where immune systems recognize the protein does not belong there and begins to build an immune response and make antibodies. At the end of this process, our bodies have learned how to protect against future infection. On August 16, 2018, BioNTech announced that it would enter a multi-year research and development collaboration with Pfizer Inc. to develop mRNA vaccines for prevention of influenza. With the emergence of COVID-19, this collaboration played a key role in the development of their BNT162b2 vaccine. On August 12, 2020, they shared that their BNT162 program was evaluating at least 4 experimental vaccines, each of which represents a unique combination of mRNA format and target antigen. The preliminary data collected demonstrates that BNT162b1 could be administered in a dose that was well tolerated and generated dose-dependent immunogenicity as measured by RBD binding concentrations and COVID-19 neutralizing antibody titers. The phase 2 and 3 study evaluated the safety, tolerability, and immunogenicity of 3 different COVID-19 vaccines candidates and the efficacy of one candidate in preparation of distribution and successful certification from government regulators. They began manufacturing doses as some countries like the US had agreements in place already. During phase 1 and 2, they had a randomized placebo-controlled observer-blinded study and was utilized to evaluate the safety and immunogenicity of varying dose levels of BNT162b1 and BNT162b2 in 195 participants randomized into 13 groups of 15 participants. The results seen from this phase of trials were positive as participants displayed a favorable breadth of epitopes recognized in T cell responses specific to the COVID-19 spike antigen. As phase 2 and 3 came to a close, the primary efficacy analysis demonstrates BNT162b2 to be 95% effective against COVID-19 beginning 28 days after the first dose. They have the highest efficacy rate of any COVID-19 vaccine, followed closely by Moderna at 94%, Gamaleya at 91%, J&J and AstraZeneca both at 67%. Primary pre-puncture storage requirements for their vaccine are negative 25 degrees Celsius to negative 15 degrees Celsius for up to 2 weeks and negative 80 degrees Celsius to negative 60 degrees Celsius after that period. When comparing this to Moderna, they are similar at negative 25 degrees Celsius to negative 15 degrees Celsius, but AstraZeneca and J&J can be stored at 2 degrees Celsius to 8 degrees Celsius, which gives them a competitive advantage. During July, agreements with the UK, USA, and Japan were negotiated. Pfizer's closing stock price on July 1st was $32.01, and following the positive press release for the UK agreement, the stock closed at $34.63 on the 20th. The stock saw about an 8.2% growth in stock price in that period because of the positive news issued by the company. Despite all of the positive news at the end of the month, including the Japan agreement, the stock price started falling near this time. On November 11, 2020, Pfizer and BioNTech announced that they have reached an agreement with the European Commission to supply 200 million doses of their investigational BNT162b2 mRNA-based vaccine candidate to European Union member states, with an option for the European Commission to request an additional 100 million doses. As they ramped up for deliveries in the month of December, their stock price saw great growth, growing 11.5% during the month of November. Pfizer's stock reached its peak on December 8th when it reached a stock price of $42.56. Despite the good news the company issued in December, the stock price did not do well, falling 13.5% from the December peak. In January of 2021, the stock started to decline further and it continued to perform poorly into the month of February. Throughout March, the stock price began to rise and make up for the decrease in stock price over the first few months of the year. When deliberating the solvency of the organization, the debt ratio and the interest coverage ratio were considered. The debt ratio for Pfizer strengthened in 2020, as it was 0.62 in 2019, and is currently 0.59, meaning that the company became more liquid. When considering this ratio to competitors, they have significantly stronger ratios, as Moderna and J&J have ratios of 0.64 and 0.65 respectively. The interest coverage ratio for Pfizer has weakened over the past years as earnings before interest tax, income tax, and interest payments for 2020 increase. However, it is still a favorable ratio. When considering the liquidity ratios, the company's current ratio and quick ratios were analyzed. In 2020, Pfizer's current ratio improved drastically, moving from 0.88 to 1.35, showing that their ability to meet their short-term debt is improving. Through the analysis of the profitability ratios, Pfizer's return on equity and return on assets worsened. However, with the revenue recognition standards, this was expected. They still remained similar to their competitor, J&J, while Moderna has experienced a negative ROA and ROE as they experienced a net loss during 2020. Pfizer has a very straightforward way of recognizing revenues, which is in accordance with IFRS standards. They record revenues from product sales when there is a transfer of control of the product from Pfizer to the customer. This method is fairly standard across the industry, and their main competitors, specifically J&J, use this method as well. Research and development costs are typically expensed as they are incurred in the industry. These expenses include the cost of the proprietary R&D efforts, as well as the costs incurred in connection with certain licensing agreements. During 2020 fiscal year, Pfizer had a net income attributable to their common shareholders of $9,616 million. This comes after having a net income of $16,273 million in 2019, which is a 40.9% decrease this year. When looking at the 2018 numbers, there was a net income of $11,513 million, which means they also had a 16.5% decrease of revenues from the 2018 earnings as well. The accruals for Pfizer come from their Medicare, Medicaid, and state-related performance-based contract rebates, chargebacks, sales allowances, and their sales returns and cash discounts. The trade accounts receivable are stated at their net realizable value. Furthermore, the allowance for doubtful accounts reflects their best estimate of expected losses of the receivables portfolio, determined on the basis of historical experience, current information, and forecasts of future economic conditions. In the cash flows from operating activities section, the depreciation expense was lower than in previous years, resulting in less of an add-back adjustment to cash and cash equivalents. Furthermore, the gain on completion of consumer healthcare JV transaction created a smaller deduction in 2020 compared to 2019. When considering cash flows from investing activities, a significant deduction came from purchases of short-term investments, as there was almost a 100% increase from 2019. The net cash used in investing activities increased this year mostly due to the drastic increase of short-term investment purchases. Lastly, the cash flows from financing activities were greatly affected by Pfizer's principal payments on short-term borrowings. This amount increased from $8,373 million in 2019 to $22,197 million in 2020. The stock price, days before the announcement of Q1 results, was on a steady increase as it rose from $34.81 on April 23, 2020 to $36.37 on April 27th, a day before the press release. After the news came out about the poor performance in the first quarter, the stock dropped from $36.37 to $35.95, which reflects a 1.15% decrease in stock price. After the initial drop, when the news was announced, the stock started to rise again, reaching their old stock price again 2 days after it was announced, most likely because of their initiatives towards a COVID-19 vaccine. Despite the performance in the second quarter, Pfizer's stock still showed growth. The stock was on a steady decline before the announcement of their second quarter performance, and when the results came out, they saw their stock price increase by almost 4% in a single day. Despite relatively good news in the third quarter and positive outlooks on their BNT 162 candidate, the stock price continued to decline. A few days before the press release, the stock dropped marginally from $36.22 to $35.98, a change of 0.66%. When the press release came out, the stock saw a similar drop initially. However, it saw a much sharper drop the next day. After the fourth quarter news that was positive, the stock price did not react the way investors thought it would, as it was decreasing before the press release and did not see much growth afterwards. However, when looking towards the future, there should be significant stock growth as Pfizer is gearing up to have a strong year in 2021. Pfizer typically pays an annual dividend of $1.56 per share, about 34 cents per share quarterly, and has a dividend yield of 4.03%. In 2020, they paid cash dividends of $8.440 billion and had net income of $9.639 billion. This means that their dividend payout ratio would be their cash dividends paid divided by their net income of $9.639 billion, which would give a dividend payout ratio of 87.56%. Since Pfizer is a mature entity with an enormous cash flow and revenues of over $40 billion annually, it makes sense that they would pay the majority of their net income out as a dividend. In 2019, their net income was $15.908 billion, and they paid $8.043 billion in cash dividends that year, leading to a payout rate of only 50.56%. This was a significant decrease in the payout ratio. However, when looking back even further at 2018 numbers, the rate seems much more comparable, justifying the dividend paid out in 2020. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.